Mark Bergin, Luis Fernandez. Luis, we get to do double duty. Not only are we going to be on WRAL Triangle and Two, we're also going to be part of the WRAL Daily Download this week as the ACC Tournament gets underway.
Got to get folks ready. Best time of the year, that's for sure.
We're going to talk about all three Triangle teams from the men's basketball perspective. NC State, UNC. But we start with Duke, the number one seed in the ACC Tournament, getting the double bye, ending the season number one in the country. Cooper Flagg just won the ACC Conference Player of the Year. It's been quite the season for the Duke Blue Devils, Lewis.
No, they have looked outstanding. You're looking at the metrics. This is one of the best Duke teams in decades. One of the best teams just in college basketball in decades. Some of the detractors against the Blue Devils will say, okay, well, the ACC isn't really that good this year. But the way they have been winning these games has been outstanding. They are just a very well-crafted team that is able to win games in multiple ways. We've seen that throughout the entire course of the year. This team is going to be a 1 seed, and I think it's the expectation is for them to be dancing in San Antonio in the Final Four.
I think short of a national championship, it's championship or bust for this Duke Blue Devils team. I think they're that good this season, Lewis, and I think anything else would be a bit of a disappointment. To me, really the only question going into the NCAA tournament is, can they either win the conference outright or go deep enough in the conference tournament to get the number one overall seed of the NCAA tournament? Really, that's the only question I have going into the big dance, and that's the NCAA tournament for Duke.
Yeah, and that is going to be they're going to be a 1 seed, okay? But which 1 seed is it? They will be playing in Raleigh in the first round and second round should they win, regardless. But obviously, trying to be that number 1 overall seed, technically, when you are that, you are going to have an easier bracket, an easier region. Now, that's always up for interpretation based on, what the committee ends up doing, who they assign, how they match up against Duke, all that stuff. But it's really going to come down between Duke and Auburn. Auburn stumbled in the final week of the regular season. They've lost twice. It's not like they were losing to, bum teams, though. They lost to Texas A&M and they lost to Alabama, both who are in the top 25. Duke beat Auburn back in December. I think that's going to be an interesting kind of factor in play. Auburn, though, when it comes to quad 1 teams, they played 20 of them this year, and they beat 16 of them, which is wild. Look at Duke. They played 10. They beat 7. So, I think it would require Auburn losing in the SEC tournament and Duke going all the way in dominant fashion. But we'll see. That's why they play the games.
Yeah, Lewis, I want to say one other thing, too. I wonder if psychologically any of the Duke players feel shortchanged because we found out all the ACC awards this past week. Cooper Flagg, Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year. He's been prolific for the Blue Devils. But no other Duke player was on the ACC first team. And it hasn't just been Cooper Flagg. And if you need evidence of that, go look at this past Saturday's game against UNC. Flagg was on the bench for a lot of the first half, battling foul trouble. This team can win in a multitude of ways. Cooper Flagg is the headline. Do not get me wrong about that. But you've got Tyrese Proctor, Kamen Maluach, Con Knipple. Who else? Cyan James. Who else am I missing here? This team is so deep. And they can win in a variety of ways, which I think really bodes well for them, not just from going deep in the conference tournament, but going on a Final Four run. Again, to me, it's championship or bust with this Duke team this year. Let me land here, too. And the reason I say this is the point differential for Duke this season. Yeah. Plus 434 points. That's the largest for a power conference team in league play. Yeah. Since Kentucky in 1953 and 1954. College basketball has been played for a long time, Lewis. Duke isn't just winning, they're winning against their opponents in dominant fashion, at least when it comes to ACC play.
No, I agree. This team is perfectly crafted. I think that's the best way to describe it. The players that they got in the transfer portal, the young talented players that came in, it was okay. What are our weaknesses? What are our strengths? Let's adapt around it. And the way it's come together has been so incredibly impressive this year.
Yeah, we'll see how far Duke can go. ACC tournament again. They got the double bye, so Duke won't play until Thursday. So we'll see who makes it that far in the tournament. Let's get to some other teams here, though, Lewis. North Carolina, and whether or not the Tar Heels will make the NCAA tournament. And it looks like they're, at the very least, going to need to go on somewhat of a run in the ACC tournament to even qualify for the NCAA tournament.
Right. And I don't think that's because they are that far out of the NCAA tournament, but it's who they're playing. Who are they going to be going up against, right? We're recording this on Tuesday, so we'll know this answer by the time you're listening to this, but they'll face the winner of Pittsburgh and Notre Dame on Wednesday. Okay, you beat them. That doesn't move the needle. Those aren't teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament. So then you go to, if you win, and if Wake Forest wins, you'll face the Demon Deacons on Thursday. Or no, I'm sorry, they'll face Demon Deacons regardless if they win. They have the double bye. But you beat Wake Forest, okay, that's better, but that's also a bubble team. So if you beat them, great, but I don't know if that moves the needle enough. And then, assuming everything is chalk, you would face Duke in the semifinals. So you're essentially in the exact same position you were on Saturday, which is beat Duke, probably get in the NCAA tournament. Now, I think there are going to be some things that are mixed in there as well. The big thing holding North Carolina back, Mark, is the record against quad one opponents. They've had a very difficult schedule, especially out of conference, but they just haven't beaten those teams that move the needle. 1-11 overall against the best teams in the country, essentially.
Yeah, 1-11, and the quad one matchups are the best of the best in college basketball. So those are your toughest opponents, and UNC gave Duke its best shot this past weekend. I thought it was the RJ Davis game. He had 15 of his 20 points in the first half. He couldn't miss. UNC even took a lead in the second half of that game, but it wasn't enough, and it hasn't been enough all season long for UNC. I was watching that game, Lewis, and it just felt to me, from more of a fan perspective, but it felt to me where I'm like, if UNC had this urgency earlier in the season, perhaps they wouldn't be in a situation where they need to pretty much win out to make the NCAA tournament.
When UNC, whatever, if UNC ends up not making the NCAA tournament, they'll look back on the beginning part of the season, and that's where they will have this kind of what if type thought, because there was an overtime game against Michigan State. Michigan State's now a top 10 team. There was a tight game against Florida. Florida could be one of the number one seeds. So if one or both of those results go differently, then hey, you're good. Not even a question. You're not even on the bubble. So it really is just like thin margins, and the ACC not being very good this year plays into that. That ties into all of that. So, it's if this UNC team that has been playing over the past 7 games, that had the 6-game winning streak and then lost to Duke in a tight game, like, this is a totally different team. The way they're playing, the urgency that they're playing with, the rotations that they're playing with, and so I think that's what it's going to come down to, though, is you have to beat Duke. Most likely, you have to get 1, maybe even 2 quad one wins in the ACC tournament.
Yeah, short of either winning the ACC tournament outright or at the very least, like, making the ACC final, I don't think UNC is going to make it. We'll see, and that's how most projections have it going into the ACC tournament. We transition here to NC State, coming off the news of the firing of head coach Kevin Keatts, Lewis. And it's now been, 48 hours, 72 hours after the fact. What is next for NC State after this firing? Because there's a vacancy for their head coaching position for the men's basketball team?
Well, you gotta find someone. That would be the biggest thing. The timeline I think is important. The transfer portal for the NCAA men's basketball transfer portal opens on March 24th, so that's less than 2 weeks now. So you want someone in place. You want someone who can already start to develop those connections. Probably has those connections already. So the timing is going to be everything at this point. Kevin Keatts, in his statement that he said afterwards, he said, I wholeheartedly believe that, I left the program in a better place than I found it. And I think that's totally fair. When you look at the investigations that they were ongoing under when he got there, when you look at, bringing NC State to the national forefront with the Final Four run, I think that the program's definitely in a better place. But now it's going to be about another thing that he emphasized, being the resources that are being allocated towards the men's basketball program, guiding them through this new NIL transfer portal revenue sharing, world that we live in. So it's going to be two fronts. It's going to be who they bring in, and it's going to be how they invest resources into the program.
I will give you some names for potential head coaches, but with Keatts really quickly, I want to stay on this for just a second here. There were two very surprising things about the statement that he put out, which I thought was very well written. Number one, he did not mention Boo Corrigan, the NC State athletics AD, at all in the statement. I think that's very interesting. But then the part of the quote, and he says, quote, "The basketball program will continue to thrive when supported to the level necessary to compete," end quote. To me, that's like, okay, whoever the next guy is, Lewis, is going to need the NIL money, essentially the money to be able to compete with the best of the best, not just in the ACC, but the country overall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bigger picture standpoint. You also have a new chancellor coming in at NC State over the summer.
Yep.
I expect a basketball coach to already be hired before you bring in a new NC State chancellor. But
if it's not, then that is awful. That is retcon 1 or 5, whatever it is.
The reason this is so important for any athletics department all across the country, your two biggest revenue drivers typically are football and men's basketball.
Yeah, I what he highlighted there, he Kevin Keatts kind of been talking about the money side of things all season. I go back to after NC State lost its second game against UNC. He was asked a couple of times about NIL and things like that, and the momentum that you maybe get after a Final Four win. And he said back in the day, like before all of this, to paraphrase him, he was like, you go to the Final Four, and that's a huge boost to your recruiting and what you're able to bring in, because people are saying, hey, you've been there, you won the ACC tournament. Like, yes, I want to go there. And some of that essentially is neutralized with NIL because it still is coming down to, okay, hey, what you all did was great, but what's the money situation like? And so that's something that Kevin Keatts talked about a lot throughout the course of the season. I don't think he intended for it to sound like an excuse, but that's just some of the facts. And so when you are looking for new coaches to bring in, it's not going to be just, hey, how much are you paying me? It's, hey, what are the resources looking like? And to be fair, I think they're one looking at some of the numbers for some of the different NIL programs, the collectives and things like that NC State has. There was boosts in people donating. There were boosts in people coming in. So, but it can't just be the grassroots efforts, if you will. There has to be a lot of money put into the program.
I promised some names, Lewis, and I promise we'll get there. I've got one other thing too, though. We're about to enter the ACC tournament, and NC State didn't make it after a year where the team made the Final Four, didn't qualify with the conference expansion. NC State didn't win a true road game on the road this year. But I look back to a year ago when State went on its miraculous Final Four run. And when I found out about the news about Keatts getting hired, there were two things I thought about from the ACC tournament a year ago. On the Tuesday, when we're recording this, a year ago, NC State was down at halftime against Louisville, and it's like they might lose in the very first game of the ACC tournament. They were trailing at halftime to Louisville. That's number one. Number two, Michael O'Connell shot in the semifinal game against Virginia. If he misses that shot and they don't go into overtime, the run doesn't happen. So, like, if Louisville wins in the very first game or if Virginia wins, perhaps we would have been talking about NC State looking for a new head coach a year ago. The Final Four run, some would argue, puts this off for a year. And so when Keatts got fired, I thought back to a year ago in those two instances where State was very, very close to where season's over.
Yep.
And it didn't happen. And they went on the run that they did, which was so exciting. But again, you fast forward to a year later, if you don't even win a true road game all season long, it was just a long, long season for the NC State Wolfpack. If you have any thoughts about that, hop in here, Lewis. Otherwise, I can give you two names I've got here as potential future head coaches of the NC State Wolfpack.
No, this was not a 1 year does not, make a 10-year. 1 year does not break a 10-year. And the Final Four run was amazing, and it creates all these different memories and that, are going to be there forever for NC State fans, in the rafters with the banners that they put up and things like that. I mean, it's amazing, and I think it has to be applauded. But when making a decision like this, Boo Corrigan, the athletics director, looks not just at the highs, he also looks at the lows. And, besides that miraculous run, which was miraculous in a lot of different ways, you had 2 NCAA appearances. You had a stretch of 4 years, and there were some, the investigations and things like that, and impact scholarship. So that's an important, thing to note.
Mm-hmm.
But, ultimately it wasn't enough. I mean, he was still had a losing record in the ACC, and especially in the past few years when the ACC has not been what it has historically been. It's sometimes the writing is just on the wall.
All right, Lewis, I'm going to go one at a time with the two coaches. McNeese State coach Will Wade. Does that do anything for you? Is there anything there? That's a possibility of, look, there's going to be a long list of candidates in a nationwide search. He is one of them. And look, he's working under a show cause penalty right now, the NCAA. However, that expires after this season. And that stems from NCAA violations from when he was coaching at LSU. Let's see, though. But in the NIL era, a lot of the things where he was accused of doing, it's a new world order, if you will, because of NIL, which wasn't in place when he was at LSU. That's one possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one would be out of Tennessee. He's an associate head coach under Rick Barnes, Justin Gainey as well. Also an NC State alum.
Yeah. So, with the addendum that these names that we are saying are not like, hey, we have inside information. This is
correct.
These are the like national spotlight. When people say, hey, there are positions coming out in the, in men's college basketball for head coaching positions, who's going to fill them? These are the names that get thrown out there nationally. Ryan Odom over at VCU is another name that gets mentioned a lot. I think there's a lot of potential for great people or great coaches to fill this in. Will Wade, you mentioned the NCAA investigations, the violations, things like that. That's something that you have to think about. That's something that you have to look at. He's probably he's going to be the most, the combination of experience and talent that I think would really be a lot. It would be very helpful. But, you have to put his past into perspective here. VCU, Ryan Odom, he's had a lot of success with VCU. We'll see. They probably will have to win their conference tournament to get to the big dance, but they're in a really good position too. You mentioned Justin Gainey. I think that's another. If you want to go like the assistant coach of a Power 4 team, that would be a great route to go. Really, it comes down to: do you go assistant coach of a Power 4 team? Do you go like an NBA assistant coach? We saw Florida State just do that. And you also the mid-majors, which would be kind of the Odoms and the Wades of the world. So what route do you go? I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. Regardless, though, you need to start seeing results. This is not an NC State team you're coming into, the new head coach, where you've got Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams coaching, just a few miles away from you anymore. This is a totally different ACC. It's a totally different college basketball world. And like I said, I think that you're not going to be in the situation that Kevin Keatts was coming into, had all these investigations and things like that. So you gotta, whoever ends up becoming the next NC State coach, you're gonna want to start seeing success.
Lewis, I have to commend you. I think you hit the nail on the head of regardless of who NC State decides to hire, upping that NIL money and making sure they have the resources to succeed, I think is going to be maybe even, if not more important, just as important of whichever candidate that they bring in. So I have to commend you there. We've got a huge week ahead here at WRAL with the ACC tournament. We also have women's coverage. Also, remember, Selection Sunday is coming up this weekend.
Yep.
And we've got games at the Lenovo Center in Raleigh, regardless of which of the Triangle teams are playing. So we are going to have our hands full, and you can always check out our content over at WRLSportsFan.com, WRL.com. You can see our boy, Luis Fernandez, on the tube on WRL TV. But I cannot wait for the madness to get underway, Luis.
I just putting this on everyone's radar, right? What you're probably going to have next week for the NCAA tournament is you are going to have Duke playing at the Lenovo Center, and then you are going to have NC State, UNC, and Duke women's basketball all hosting the first weekend. So because they are most likely going to be top 16 seeds. So I don't, the per capita, the per square mile, like it's the amount of college basketball that is going to be going on in this part of North Carolina is absolutely ridiculous. So look forward to that. I am looking forward to it.
He is Luis Fernandez. I am Mark Bergin. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download, and on WRAL Triangle and Two, we'll have plenty of coverage here ahead this week. The madness is here. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care. So long, everybody.